Okay, there's the door. Deep breath. I open it slowly, as quietly as possible. Enter the room and have a look around. It's my very first time. A long mahogany table stretches out before me, flanked by high-backed leather chairs, seemingly standing at attention. A gigantic window frames the city's skyline in the distance. Wow, what a view! Off to one side, members are sipping coffee, chatting quietly. Man, am I nervous. What have I gotten myself into? Heads turn. There's a pause. Why are they looking at me like that? Wait a minute. Who are these people? No, I've walked into the wrong boardroom. Welcome to the ATA Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Baird, and you're listening to Episode 3, Inside the ATA Boardroom. Now, I've never walked into the wrong boardroom. In fact, I've only walked into one boardroom for that matter. But I certainly get nervous walking into unfamiliar places. And there's always that bit of fear that, you might be in the wrong place. But have no fear. Today on the podcast, we're going to go inside the right boardroom. There we'll talk with ATA President David Rumsey and ATA President-elect Corinne McKay to find out what board meetings are all about. Now, the ATA board gathers 4 times a year to chart the association's progress and plot our future course. So what exactly goes on in there? I'll let you in on a little secret. It's actually no secret at all. The meeting minutes are published on the ATA website, and a summary of the meeting is in the ATA Chronicle. And get this, board meetings are open to the public. So why don't we go check it out? Come on. I'll get the door, but please keep your voices down. The meeting is already in progress.
I call this meeting to order. The first order of business is to adopt the agenda. Hearing no objections, the agenda is adopted.
Point of order, Mr. President.
State your point.
Shouldn't we also approve the minutes of the February 2016 board meeting and ask for any corrections to those minutes?
Okay, wait, okay. I'm going to stop you guys both right there. I'm going to stop you right there. Now, David, tell me, is it really like that?
Well, yes and no. We do follow a standard procedure, but we are human too. So Corinne and I just thought we'd have a little fun here to introduce the podcast. Most associations this size, ATA uses something called Robert's Rules of Order as a guide for the meeting. Basically, that's what sort of gives it that formal flavor. Essentially we use it because we have about 2 days every 3 months to deal with a host of topics. And using this sort of formalized Robert's Rules helps us really work efficiently and fairly. It helps provide basically a clear structure for decision making. It ensures that all of the board members get a chance to ask questions and comment on agenda items. The process seems a little formal, but it's very deliberative, which is really a good thing in a board meeting. It allows us to sort of carefully consider each item over time to make sure that we think about the larger implications and nothing gets pushed through too rashly.
Okay, now, what exactly are the Robert's Rules of Order?
I guess I should back up there. So, Robert's Rules of Order is basically the most common type of parliamentary rules for associations in the U.S. They've been around since, I think, 1870, 1876. And it was created by this General so-and-so Robert. And basically, they're rules for how to run a meeting at an association. It's how to raise an issue, how to interrupt an issue, how to discuss the issue, and most importantly, how to vote on an issue. So if you go to your local government council, your local city council, you'll see them using Robert's Rules of Order. It provides sort of a structure for the meeting so that it stays on track, it stays on topic, it stays on time, and it doesn't become, chaos and people shouting on top of each other.
Okay, so all that formal stuff, the calling the meeting to order, point of order, whatever, making motions, etc., that all has its roots in rules that were written like 140 years ago.
Yep, that's right.
Wow,
But it's worked really well. It's really worked well for a long time.
that's fascinating. I didn't know that. Of course, you hear that you see in movies, and every one of us has been to some a meeting that has heard that. But I guess I never knew the history. Um, Now, Corinne, anyone who's been to an ATA board meeting knows there are no long mahogany tables and no high back leather chairs like you see in the movies. So set the scene for us. What's an ATA board meeting really like?
Well, sometimes we have a Formica mahogany table, I guess. But beyond the rules and procedures, I would actually say that the meetings are not overly formal. They're more structured than they are formal. And the purpose of the structure is really to ensure that everybody who wants a chance to talk gets a chance to talk. So David chairs the meeting and moves us through the agenda. Our executive director, Walter Bakak, who we all know as Mooch, keeps us on schedule. So we are generally meeting in a hotel conference room, sometimes or even oftentimes a hotel we're considering for a future ATA conference. And if we're lucky, we might get a view of the city that we're visiting. Also, every April, we meet in Alexandria, Virginia, right across the street from ATA headquarters.
Okay. Now, David, you've been on the board now for a couple of years as president-elect, now president. Tell me about your first, but you were director before that. Tell me about your first board meeting. Was it what you expected?
Actually, I joined the board midway through the year in the summer at a summer meeting because another board member had left the board, had resigned, and I took over in her place. The board meeting was actually way more professional than I anticipated. I did miss the note that there was a dress code that included a suit and tie. So I initially showed up rather casually dressed, felt a little out of place. And I remember my shoes fell apart, like the glue in my shoes basically fell apart. And I stood up and my glues, the shoes basically fell apart. I had to run to Payless Shoes down the street. It was in Chicago at the time. And I'm running down Michigan Avenue barefoot to get a pair of shoes that I could wear. But I digress. So the first impression I had really was that not only was it really professional, but it turns out that there are a lot of different angles of of each issue than you think. And the scope of what the ATA board deals with is actually really, really broad. And so you go in there thinking you know exactly all the details and you know exactly what you want to say, and then turns out there's other sides of the issue that you hadn't thought of. It's also that there's a lot of information to catch up on. That's what most new directors discover, that you basically, it's like going to a cocktail party and joining the conversation midway. And it's difficult in the beginning. You feel overwhelmed because you don't know all the details of the conversation. But over time, the conversation kind of changes and it grows based on your own input, and you get a better sense of the issues, and you are able to add your 2 cents more clearly.
Interesting. I had never thought of it that way. Corinne, how about you? How was your first experience?
So I think I spent most of my first board meeting just hoping that no one would notice or call on me and that I wouldn't say anything that sounded ridiculous. Because as David said, I think you're plunged into a lot of ongoing issues that you have to try very quickly to catch up on. But I found that the other board members were totally willing to help me get up to speed. And also I joined the board with some ideas about what I wanted to work on, which I think is helpful.
Okay. David, the board meets 4 times a year. Where do you meet and why quarterly?
Well, as Corinne said, one of those sessions is at the ATA conference, which is open to all the conference attendees. One of them is also at right near headquarters in Alexandria, Virginia, and that happens in conjunction with the meeting of the language chairs for the certification program. And that basically leaves 2 other meetings which we can hold at different potential conference sites. So we can actually look at a hotel before we decide that we're going to go to one particular location or another. And the reason we meet quarterly basically is because we have a lot of different committees, a lot of different divisions, a lot of people involved, and it takes a while. You need people enough time to implement all the decisions from the last meeting. So that's why we meet quarterly. And you'll find once you're on the board, those 3 months can go really quickly.
I can imagine. Now, you just alluded to it, but why exactly the different locations?
Basically, we're able to kill two birds with one stone by having a board view a potential conference location and hold our meeting. And a lot of times we'll get a deal from the hotel that will host us, so that they know that we might potentially pick them for the conference, so we get a deal on staying there.
Okay. Corinne, back to you. Walk us through a meeting, or should we say a weekend of meetings. David mentioned earlier that you meet for 2 days.
Yeah, that's correct. So with the exception of the meeting at the conference, which is a little shorter, we meet all day Saturday and then again on Sunday morning. And we try to sort of alternate between topics that are somewhat mundane but necessary. So, for example, the board votes every year on the date by which you have to be an ATA member in order to vote in the ATA elections. And we alternate those with topics that are kind of thornier, like, say, our new antitrust compliance policy. We spent a lot of time talking about that a couple of meetings ago. We are also sometimes visiting a potential host hotel for the conference, so we might actually go on a tour of it. And then we have time for members to speak if they're attending in person.
Okay. Now, I actually attended part of the board meeting in Miami last November, and I noticed each one of you had like these huge binders in front of you. How much prep work do you put into each meeting?
Yeah, quite a bit. And just to remark on the size of the binders, I'm actually considering getting a tablet so that I can get the electronic version of the board book so I don't have to carry the binder everywhere with me. But yeah, it's a lot of prep work. So I read every report and then I use Post-it notes to write down my questions or comments that I want to make during the meeting. And then, of course, there's also a lot of time spent writing your own reports. For example, if you've ever read our treasurer Ted Wozniak's reports, they make your head spin because they're so dense and detailed. So definitely a lot of work goes into preparing for every meeting.
David, what have been some of the top priorities on the agenda in recent meetings?
Well, like Corinne said, revisiting our FTC compliance policy was a big part of the meeting in January. Back in November, we set up ATA Talk, and there was a long discussion about different types of forums. And there's a host of other updates and reports from the various committees and divisions that we have to review and address each time.
Okay. What's currently topping the agenda?
Well, it's budget season, and we get to review the budget in detail, and that's usually pretty intense. We also get a detailed report from the certification committee, who's been looking into major changes in the way the exam is delivered.
Okay.
And I personally am in the thick of planning the conference right now. So that is the highest thing on my mind, sort of looking at what's on the agenda for San Francisco and also the next conference site that we're selecting, which will be for 2020.
Okay. Now, each board meeting includes a block of time for remarks from the general membership. Is that an opportunity for members to attend and to voice complaints or concerns?
Oh, absolutely. In many cases, there are ordinary members who attend the meetings, and this gives them an opportunity to address the board with the good, the bad, and the ugly. However, I will say many are quite astounded by the amount of work and the amount of consideration that goes into the issues.
Well, I can second that motion. I guess that was precisely my impression when I attended in Miami. Now, say I don't want to attend the entire meeting, but I do want to show up at this time because I have something to say. How do I find out at what precise time the remarks are heard?
Well, we do announce the meeting time and the place for all the members about a week or two in advance. And although the schedule can move around a bit, we don't necessarily tell people exactly at 5:07, this is when we're going to start. But we give you a general time. It's generally at the very end of each day of the meeting. We don't necessarily expect people to show up at 8 a.m. in the morning to address the board.
Yeah, that wouldn't be a good thing, not for me at least. Now, when and where is the next board meeting?
It's being held at the main floor of the Embassy Suites Hotel in Alexandria, Virginia, on April 30th and May 1st.
Okay.
It's actually right across the street from headquarters, and it's right across the street from the Kings Road station. It's 2 stops from National Airport if you want to fly in for it.
Okay. Now, the word transparency comes up from time to time in connection with the board's activities. I know that the board has been working, really hard to keep members better informed. Can each of you share your thoughts about that?
Absolutely. Keeping members informed is a huge priority for us. Shortly after the meeting, we do something kind of unusual. We provide a summary of the board meeting that lists off all the issues that were addressed. And a few weeks later, the formal minutes are posted on the website. Like most corporations and most associations, as a matter of liability, we do not provide detailed minutes of exactly what each board member says. That would make the secretary's job very difficult. It would slow down the entire process, and it would make it kind of difficult, or board members might feel less free to speak their mind. Not to mention, it's also impossible to kind of record all the different thoughts and considerations that may go into a board member's mind before they actually make a decision. So what really matters is that you record what is decided, and that's typically what shows up in the minutes.
Definitely the best way to get a feel for a board meeting is to attend in person. But of course, not everybody can do that because of location. But I do think that everyone should read the summary that David referred to that we post on the website. And we have even been live tweeting some of the decisions made during the board meetings if you want to follow ATANet on Twitter.
Wow, are you kidding me? The Twitterverse now reaches into the boardroom. Okay, Corinne, now I have to ask you, have you tweeted during this podcast?
Well, one of my personal goals is to multitask less. So I try not to tweet while I'm recording something, but I will definitely post a tweet afterward.
Right on. I hope you do. Then we'll get some traction. Well, after all this talk of Robert's Rules, I don't know the proper way to say it, but we've reached the last item on our agenda today. So, David and Corinne, I want to thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you. This meeting is adjourned, I think is what we say.
Thank you, Matt, for hosting.
Oh, no, my pleasure. Thank you. And thanks to everyone out there for tuning in to episode 3 of the ATA podcast, Inside the ATA Boardroom. Now, if you have any remarks about this podcast, you don't have to wait until the next board meeting to address them. Just send them to me at any time by writing to podcast@atanet.org. And feel free to send me ideas for future podcasts. I'd like to know what you'd like to know more about. Special thanks again to David and Corinne for their time and effort creating this episode. And I'd also like to thank Mary David and Rashawn Pacarel at ATA headquarters for their input, advice, and technical support. Well, David, that really only leaves one more thing. Why don't you take us out in true Robert's Rules style?
This meeting is adjourned.